Hello, and welcome to this series of videos on the TI-30XS calculator. My name is Becky McGuffin, and I'm a math instructor with the Heartland Adult Education Consortium. The goal of this series of videos is to teach you how to get the maximum benefit out of your calculator on test day. When I tutor students, I always begin by asking them how comfortable they are with the calculator. And they almost always reply, "Oh yes, Miss Becky, I know how to use the calculator." But as I work with them, I find they really only knew how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide. I often hear, "I didn't know the calculator would do that," after I show them one of the calculator functions. In this series, we'll go over exponent buttons, scientific notation, fractions, percents, even the store and variable buttons that you'll be able to use for more challenging algebra problems like those you'll find on the GED. If possible, I suggest you have one of the calculators in your hand as we go through these videos. That will allow you to practice each of the keystrokes as we go through different examples. This journey may be long, but I promise it will be rewarding and you will learn something about your calculator before we finish. So let's begin. In this video, we're going to learn how to use the buttons that will help us with percent questions on the GED. Percents are always based on 100. We have two buttons on our calculator that we will be using. One of them is on the open parentheses and is a green percent symbol. This button we will use when we know the number in front of the percent. On the closed parentheses, we have an arrow to a percent. This is the button we're going to use when we're trying to find what percent, when we're going to change something to a percent. Let's first talk about changing a percent to a decimal or a fraction. So the first thing, I know the number in front of the percent symbol. So we can type 76, hit our second, and our open parentheses puts the percent symbol there. Now to change to a decimal without the calculator, we're really dividing by 100, moving our decimal 2 places to the left. On the calculator, if I enter 76% and I hit enter, the calculator changes it to 76%. To change it to a fraction, we put the percent number over 100. 76% means 76 out of 100. We can hit our N over D button and put 76 on top, move to the bottom, and put 100 on the bottom. Scoot over, hit enter, and the calculator will simplify the fraction to 19/25 for us. There are two buttons for doing percent problems on the calculator. The trick is learning when to use which one. The first one we will use is the one with the percent symbol. It is just above the open parentheses. This is the button we will use when we know what percent we're looking for. So let's look at finding 6% of $48. Let's say we're finding 6% sales tax of a $48 item. I know the number in front of the percent. I know what percent. So we're going to type 6, second, and our open parentheses puts my percent symbol there. Times 48 gives me 2.88. That's $2.88 sales tax on a $48 item. Read the question carefully. If the question wants to know how much tax, the answer is $2.88. But if the question wants to know what the total cost is, you have to take the tax and add it to the $48 item, which would give you a total cost of $50.88. Let's look at another example. What if I need to find 15% of $1,799? Let's say I'm going to buy a refrigerator that costs $1,799, and I have a 15% off coupon. So we need 15% of $1,799. I know the number in front of the percent, so we'll type 15, second, and my parentheses puts the percent symbol there, times $1,799, the cost of the refrigerator. When I hit enter, I get $269.85. That's not the cost of the refrigerator. That's how much we're going to save by using our 15% coupon. If the question wants to know how much you save, the answer is $269.85. But if the question asks how much you pay, we have to take the cost of the refrigerator, $1,799, and subtract my $269.85 savings to find the cost of the refrigerator is $1,529.15. You just have to remember to really read the question carefully. Taxes, tips, and gratuities are added to the price. Discounts, sales, and coupons will be subtracted from the original price. And just always make sure you answer the question that they are asking. The second button on the calculator that we use for percents is used to change a fraction to a percent. This is useful when you have questions that ask, what percent? To use this button, we're always going to think of the part over the whole is going to equal what percent. So let's suppose I have 20 students in my GED class and 12 of them are currently working on math. So as a fraction, we would put 12 on top, that's the part that are working on math, over 20, the whole number of students in my class. I'm going to hit my N over D button and type 12 on top, move down, 20 on the bottom. Notice above the closed parentheses, I have an arrow to a percent. If I do second and the arrow to a percent, I hit enter, that changes that to 60% of my students are currently working on math. Let's look at another example. Suppose a company has 300 employees. 180 are part-time. The question asks what percent are full-time. Now, just like we mentioned earlier, you have to really read the questions carefully because this seems tricky. They give me the number of part-time employees, but they're asking what percent are full-time. They didn't tell me how many are full-time, but can I figure that information out? Sure, if there are 300 employees and 180 are part-time, we're just going to subtract 300 minus 180 tells me 120 of the employees are full-time. So now I can use my part over whole. The number of employees that are full-time is, I'm going to hit my fraction button, 120 on top over the whole, the total number of employees, 300. Move over, hit second, and arrow to a percent tells me 40% are full-time. Now, how many are part-time? Well, since percents are always based on 100, if 40% are full-time, that would mean 60% are part-time. I could figure that out two different ways. You could put 180 over 300, or you can just subtract from 100. But you have to read the question carefully to make sure that you are giving the answer that actually answers the question they are asking. There are some other types of questions that you can use the percent buttons for that you will encounter on the GED. One of those types of questions are when you're asked to find the percent change. This sometimes happens on math, but it could also show up on social studies or science. If you're asked to find the percent change, you have to put the change over the original. That formula is not one that's on the formula sheet, but if you can find the change and put that over the original as a fraction and change it to a percent, that will give you the percent change. For example, the population of a city goes from 12,500 to 14,800 in 5 years. What is the change in percent? Well, the question doesn't tell me what the change is, but since it gives me a beginning number and an ending number, we can subtract to find the change. You will find these multi-step problems on the GED So to find the change, we're going to subtract 14,800 minus 12,500. And that will give me the change of 2,300. When I think about what the original number is, we want to think, what did the population start at? That's 12,500. So we're going to hit our fraction button and we'll put our change on top over the original 12,500 and move our cursor out. I want to take that fraction and change it to a percent. So we're going to hit second and our closing parentheses that puts that arrow to a percent. That button will change the fraction to a percent and hit enter, and we get it as an 18.4% change. You could do population increase or population decrease. You just have to make sure that whatever the change in population is goes on top and whatever the original is goes on the bottom. Another type of question you ask, you might be asked about percents, deals with interest. Now this formula is on the formula sheet. It's the formula for simple interest. And it is I equals PRT. Interest equals principal times rate times time. Principal is the amount of money we're going to borrow or invest. It could be buying a CD at a bank or borrowing money to buy a car. The rate is the percent, and time is how long we are going to invest the money or how long we're going to get the loan for in years. That's the trick of this one, is it has to be in years. Your time has to be in years. So let's look at this example. A buyer is purchasing a car for $4,000. How much interest will be paid if the car loan is for 3 years at 4.2%? So this is one of those where I know the number in front of the percent, and our formula is principal times rate times time. So on our calculator, we're going to put the principal. That's how much money we want to borrow, $4,000, times my rate. That's the percent, 4.2, and I know the percent, second percent, puts my percent symbol by that 4.2%, times 3 years. And when I hit enter, it tells me that is $504 interest. This is another one of those times where you have to be careful because sometimes the GED will ask how much interest. In that case, the answer is 504. Sometimes the question will ask what's the total amount paid back. I'm not going to get my car for $504, so we would have to add the $4,000 purchase price to the $504 interest to find the total amount we're going to pay is $4,504. The fraction and percent buttons can also be helpful when doing probability questions. Probability is the likelihood that an event will occur. Basic probability can be expressed as a fraction or a percent. But to find the probability, you write a fraction as favorable outcomes over the total possible outcomes. Favorable outcomes is what we want to happen or what our desired outcome. And the total possible outcomes is our total. That will be in the denominator. Once you have it as a fraction, we can change it to a percent or we can toggle it to a decimal if we need to. So let's look at some examples here. I have a bag of marbles that has 8 red, 5 green, 6 blue, and 1 orange. So what would be the probability of getting a green marble? So we want to think about our favorable outcomes over our total. Well, the total is going to be the total number of marbles in the bag. 8 plus 5 plus 6 plus 1 is 20 total marbles. And for green, how many green marbles are in the bag? 5. So the probability of pulling a green marble out of the bag is 5 out of 20. If I enter that as a fraction, 5 over 20, and hit enter, the calculator will reduce that to 1 out of 4. If I need it as a percent, we can do second and our arrow to a percent to find that is a 25% chance of getting a green marble from that bag. The probability of red. Well, the total marbles is still the same, but now instead of 5 out of 20, we have 8 red marbles out of 20 total. We can hit our fraction, 8 on top, 20 on the bottom, hit enter, it simplifies it to 2/5. We can do our second and arrow to a percent to change that to a 40% chance of drawing a red marble. That's simple probability. If you start dealing with more compound probability, you have two things that you're wanting to happen. And to find this, it's more complicated, but we're going to multiply two things together. If I want the probability of green, then red, and there's two phrases we have to watch for, with replacement or without replacement. With replacement means I put the marble back in the bag and the total number of marbles doesn't change. So if I want the probability of green, that's 5 out of 20. And we're going to multiply that by the probability of red, 8 out of 20. If on my calculator I hit my fraction and I do 5 over 20 times fraction 8 over 20, move over, and we hit enter, we get that it is a 1/10 chance of drawing green, putting that marble back in the bag, and then drawing red. We can do second and arrow to a percent to find that is a 10% chance. Now the phrase without replacement means that we don't put the marble back in the bag after the first draw. And what that does, it ends up changing the total number of marbles in the bag. So let's suppose we're still going to do green and then red, but now instead of with replacement, we're going to find it without replacement. So my green marble, my first marble I pull out, is still the same, 5 out of 20. That number didn't change. But now I've drawn out my green marble and I'm not going to put it back in the bag. So instead of having 20 marbles in the bag, when I get ready to draw the red, I have the possibility of 8 out of 19 marbles in the bag, because without replacement means I didn't put that green marble back in. So now we have a problem. My green probability, my red probability, we'll multiply the two together, 5/20, move over, times fraction again, 8 over 19, move over, hit enter, and we get a 2/19 probability as a percent, second, arrow to a percent, and we get 10.5 if we round that to the nearest tenth. That's just a brief lesson on probability. There's a whole lot more we could cover, but that just shows you that you can use the fraction and the percent buttons to get probability once you know how to find the favorable outcomes over the total outcomes. And now it's time to practice. I encourage you to get to know your calculator, get very comfortable with it, and learn as many tips and tricks as you can for your calculator to help you on test day.